Hello there. I'm your host, Adam Hartzell. Welcome back to the Gnomon stream. Happy May the 4th, everyone. May the 4th be with you. I'm very excited for this evening's stream because we are going to be getting to sit down with ILM Senior Visual Effects Art Director, James Clyne. We're going to talk about Star Wars. We're going to talk about James' journey into art, some of the projects and things that he's worked on. We're going to be sharing some of his artwork on the screen while we do it. So sit back. Make your calculations for your jump to hyperspace, buckle in, and get ready for a fun ride. So I'm going to introduce our guest now. And before I do, I should just mention that if you're in need of closed captioning, that is available on our Facebook live stream. So that will be available if you need those services. Just head on over there, watch it on that platform, and we'll get the closed captioning up for you. All right. So as ILM Senior Visual Effects Art Director, James Clyne has worked in the film industry for almost 2 decades. He studied fine art at UC Santa Barbara, where he focused on oil painting and photography, surfing as often as possible in between classes. He was inspired by master painters and the power of light through a lens. He went to Art Center, where he studied automotive, industrial, and film production design. He graduated with honors with a Bachelor of Science. James is a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. He has won an Art Director Guild Award for Best Art Director on Avatar. In 2013, James joined Industrial Light and Magic, Lucasfilm, and was given the opportunity to work on Star Wars The Force Awakens as an art director. In the following years, he continued art directing on The Last Jedi, for Solo, A Star Wars Story, and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. And of course, there's many, many other projects that we could mention, but we're here to celebrate Star Wars today. And James has also acted as the Lucasfilm design supervisor. So with that, I want to welcome our guest. James, thank you so much for joining this evening.
Hey, everybody. Happy Star Wars Day. Happy Star Wars Day to you, Adam.
Thank you. And may the 4th be with you as well. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Living every day like it's my last, for sure.
All right, very good. Well, it's hard to believe that we started. I think we did our first May the 4th live stream with Ian McCaig a year ago, and we were all fresh into this unique season of time that we've all been in, and now we're streaming again with you today, and we've got a light at the end of the tunnel, so things are looking up.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into talking about Star Wars and those things, I wanted to just take a couple of beats just to get to know you. If you could just share a little bit about, we read about your bio, but maybe just a bit of your artistic journey and how you found your way into what you are doing presently today.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a kid, it started with me just being inspired by crazy, strange things, probably from dinosaurs to hot rods and stuff. And I grew up in Oregon as a kid, like the first 10 years, 12 years. There was a lot of rain, and I was indoors a lot. And with that, I just would just sketch in my room, like for hours and hours, and whatever kind of came to my head. So I think it kind of started with this like limitation of not being able to go outside a lot. And then honestly, the funny thing about all of it is like Star Wars came around when I was a kid. I'm that old. And it kind of blew my mind. Like the fact that there could be so much creativity, so much like imagination compacted in 90 minutes, 100 minutes. And then of course, like I got these books started to come out when Star Wars came out. And there was a book called like the Star Wars sketchbook. I think it was like Joe Johnston sketches. And that was my first like kind of window into like, wait, do they actually start with like pen and paper? Because I just imagine in my little head, they would just create all this stuff because people were like architects or like doing really big things. I didn't realize it started so small and intimate as like a drawing.
Yeah.
And I think I still have that sketchbook somewhere in my office, and you open it up and it's all tattered, but there's drawings that I've done in it. Like I've tried to mimic in a really terrible way Joe Johnston's sketches. And I think that was just like this huge spark for me from just being an artist, and then seeing that you can actually have a career in that. But much later down the road, after not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And my father wanted me to eventually go into a real career, not art career. There was a representative from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, well renowned for industrial design, automotive design. And this rep came to our high school art class and just put up these slides of like the most incredible, crazy designs of futuristic cars and futuristic products. And they had film and photography. And at that time, I didn't even know a college like that existed. I mean, I think you take it for granted, like Gnomon just being there, like nothing like Gnomon was available to anybody at the time. So understanding that a place like Art Center existed was amazing. So I was fortunate enough to get in there, and I started with car design. Halfway through, I didn't want to really design taillight housings for the rest of my life. I wanted to kind of do something bigger and faster, and that kind of industry just moved a little too slow for my ADHD or my just, my pace for things. And I had an instructor who got me my first job in the industry, and then it kind of just went from there.
What, just out of curiosity, if you don't mind saying, what was that first job that you were like, wow, I'm actually working in the industry right now?
Well, it wasn't that. Well, there was one step before that. Before the job, one of my instructors, who will go, I'm not going to name him because he snuck me onto the Warner Brothers lot, and they were making, I think it was the George Clooney Batman movie.
Wow.
The best Batman movie, of course. But he snuck me on. He's like, I want to show you what a real art department is, because he was working on that production. He was also an instructor at Art Center, and I couldn't believe that these guys were all like in this room together on a film lot designing like Mr. Freeze's van or whatever, and the Batmobile. And Joe Schumacher came in, and the director, they don't kind of casually come into the art department typically, but he just kind of strolled in and said, "What is everybody up to?" And I kind of had to sidestep my way out of the room. But just like that moment was just such a spark. It was like, oh my God, yes, this is what I want to do. The first job, I think, my first kind of like real job was working for Rhythm and Hues, which was a VFX company back in the day. They were known for doing a lot of more animal-based early CG animation. And I was working in the commercial stuff, their commercial department, doing commercial work. And it was like doing drawings, storyboards for like Weed Killer. And I was so happy. Like, I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome.
Working on a commercial, getting paid. I didn't care if it was Weed Killer or whatever, but I was so happy to just kind of have my foot in the door, so to speak.
Yeah. Was there a certain point that you, like, it dawned on you that you could draw a line all the way back to, wow, I remember being a kid and, looking at some of these designs and now I'm doing this?
Yeah, I think for me, for my family, they're like, oh, you can actually make a career out of this. Like, we just thought you were just this like screw off kid that didn't pay attention in school kind of thing. But, I set my mind to it. I wanted to achieve as much as I could out of it. And I think, looking back, it definitely, I saw kind of the building blocks of like, they always say like 10,000 hours with something. I definitely had that 10,000 hours up to that point.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point. I was grinning really big earlier because what you mentioned about when you were in school and a rep came and talked to you and it kind of dawned on you, that's literally one of the things that I do at Gnomon is I get to talk to high schoolers and community college students and say, it feel a little bit like Han Solo in The Force Awakens. I get to show up and say, it's real. All of it's real. Like, there's jobs out there and you can do them. But the point you're making about it's hard work. you have to put your time in. You have to be willing to be so passionate about it. What would you say? And this is a question that normally would come up a little bit later in the chat, but I think because it's coming up now, what would you say to kind of that? It's kind of a myth, that idea of like, well, it's all artists are starving. Like, art isn't a real job. You can't make money doing art. And I talk with a lot of students who have to make the connection of, well, it's real. You can have a job doing art, but it's not just going to be an easy job. What would you want to speak to that?
Yeah, no, it's very much a real thing. There's a demand, even more so than ever, for content. With new streaming platforms, Amazon, Netflix, Disney Plus, you name it. There's a need for content more than when I started, which was really just films. Television didn't use concept artists, concept designers that much because they neither had the time to design those type of sets or characters or whatever, or the budget for it. So it was really just film at that point. But now there's such a need for content, but I think there's also more competition out there.
Sure.
There was only a handful of us really doing it back in the day. Now it's it's worldwide. You can work with somebody in Belgium and just certainly today you can get on a Zoom, and it's no different than somebody working in the same city as yourself. So it's really competitive, but there's a lot to offer out there for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So all right, I'm gonna make a little bit of a transition here. We're going to put some of your artwork. I'm just going to scroll through some of your artwork from the various Star Wars projects that you've worked on. And I think when we were talking before the stream, was The Force Awakens your first time designing for Star Wars? Was that your first project? Okay.
Yep.
And what was that like?
I mean, it was surreal, to say the least. It was something that I didn't really imagine happening, and I was totally fine with that. Like, I was really happy with the projects I was doing up until then. But yeah, it just didn't kind of factor in. So when it happened, it was very surreal, and you're kind of thrown into the mix immediately with these superstars like Ryan Church and Ian McKegg and Christian Alsman, and you're kind of thrown in this room, and you're like, okay, we're doing the next Star Wars after Return of the Jedi. It's essentially the sequel to Return of the Jedi, and it's like, if you think about it too much, you'll wind up in fetal position in the corner, right, sobbing. So you try to be a professional, and you kind of take it one day at a time, and yeah, it was an amazing experience. So I worked really hard on that project. I was fortunate to be kind of part of the early days, and then all the way up till some of the last days of the production. So
well, and it wasn't just a sequel, and now in the timeline, this is the very next thing that happens. Right. You guys had this really unique task of projecting Star Wars 30 years forward in its timeline. So you not only had to nail that visual language for as it was at the time of Jedi, but you had to figure out, what does the Star Wars universe look like, having evolved forward. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I'm sure that wasn't easy to do.
No, I mean, there were big questions of like, well, we have the aesthetic of the original trilogy. We have the aesthetic of the prequels. Are we more closer to one over the other? Are we a completely new thing? How much do we retain of the old stuff? Ultimately, it comes down to really the director and some of the bigger creatives like Rick Carter, who really kind of push where that goes. So JJ himself was a huge fan of that trilogy and really wanted to embrace that aesthetic, but then push that aesthetic and see how far we can go with it. But those early days, yeah, we were just kind of like, trying to figure out, where do we fit within this kind of, this line of this gradation of how much are we from the past and how much do we push it to where it doesn't even resemble the past.
And I don't know if you're at liberty to discuss any of the ideas that you had that didn't make it into the film. I'm not sure, but I'm curious to know, like, what do you think? How did you know that you'd gone too far? Like, what was one of your your wackier ideas? Or
yeah, I mean, I can talk about the artwork that has been published, specifically in like the Art of Force Awakens. Yeah, I can talk about all that stuff because obviously it's to the public.
Yeah.
What I can't talk about is anything that hasn't been released to the public.
Of
but
course, yeah.
I can give an example, like in the Art of Force Awakens, we were trying to think about different scenarios on the Starkiller base, this kind of icy planet. And I had done this weird tank-looking thing that would drive through these kind of trenches that were dug out for it to kind of follow. And I was inspired by the tank sequence in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where they're kind of fighting on top of this tank, and there's these treads going by. So kind of riffing off of that idea. There are very, very few times where you get to kind of explore ground that isn't specific to the script, but we did have, a few days to kind of have a play with some of that, and that didn't make the cut. And sometimes it didn't make the cut because it is too outlandish, and sometimes it didn't make the cut simply because it just didn't fit into the story beats of the script.
Yeah, you often have to kill your darlings, and I have all of those art books, and they're just full of so many cool ideas. And obviously, you can't put every single idea into the film.
Yeah, the great idea, the great thought there is that it's a Lucasfilm property, so we can actually shelve a lot of these great ideas and reuse them in other productions. So some of the ships I've designed in some earlier productions were then used in later productions.
Yeah. I remember attending a panel in 2015 at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, California. And Rick Carter and Ryan Church and those guys were there. And I remember them talking about one of their mantras was, what would Ralph McQuarrie do? Or what would Joe Johnston do? Did you find yourself going back and looking at some of the original designs, maybe even some of those ideas that didn't find their way into the film?
I still do to this day. Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure. I mean,
yeah.
The wonderful thing about the resources we have at our company is that we have access to every single scribble that Ralph McQuarrie or Joe Johnston ever did. So even stuff that just hadn't even seen the light of day. So constantly still using those ideas and kind of farming some of those old ideas, because it's, it's part of the kind of historical documentation of Star Wars. And anything that Ralph McQuarrie does, in my mind, is like, yeah, that's gold. So
absolutely. And I mean, how it, at least to me, it seems pretty surreal. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the stream about how as a kid you're looking at the Star Wars sketchbook and even sketching some of your own things, and then you're almost fast forward, you're like literally doing that for Star Wars. You're looking at some of those original ideas and doing your own interpretations. That's pretty incredible.
It's too bizarre. Yeah, it's not a dream come true, because it's not a dream I ever had. So I never dreamt of being, being a part of a Star Wars production. So yeah, it's really bizarre.
Is that because you just figured, well, after Return of the Jedi, we don't have any more films coming? Is it more of a thing of you just didn't think you'd have the opportunity?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit of both. I was living in LA, and I was very happy working on productions in LA. And productions like for the prequels, they kind of started in San Francisco or in Marin County. And, had I had the opportunity, maybe I would have jumped on it. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen until Force Awakens.
I have to jump back just a little bit in our slideshow here, because one of the images of yours that we had, and we'll get to those bombers in a second too, because I love that design from The Last Jedi. But this one right here, I remember I believe I saw something related to this on the internet at some point. Somehow, things, randomly make it onto the internet. But I remember we were ramping up for the film, and I saw something of this image or related to this image. But I remember seeing the X-wings flying over the water, and this is a fantastic painting. I think partly because up until that time we really hadn't seen what we can do now with visual effects, which was to have these spacecraft flying over water and flying in
Sure.
atmosphere, not just taking off from a base. But I just wanted to, I don't know, maybe just nerd out on this image, because when I saw this, it totally captivated my attention, because I thought, oh my gosh, all the stuff that we can see in Star Wars now that we couldn't see,
Yeah.
20 years ago, or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean,
was this early on in the process for you, or?
It wasn't too early. It was probably kind of midway in probably pre-production. They were coming up with this whole sequence, and I think there was a reference from the Clint Eastwood movie Firefox.
Oh yes, yeah.
I don't know if you remember that movie, but he steals like a Russian spy plane or something, and it skims across the water and kicks up this huge rooster tail, and everybody was really inspired by that idea, and we're like, well, what if we play with that idea with X-wings leading up to this battle, and James do an illustration of it. So this was
awesome.
I did a really rough thumbnail sketch of it, and then just quickly went into painting it, and they really liked this. I mean, this is like, once in a while you get a great hit where it has kind of all the elements of like it's the right composition, and it just kind of has that kind of cinematic moment. And it's not just me sitting in a dark room by myself. It's conversations with the whole crew, not the whole crew, but our crew around us, of like, okay, well, what does this moment look like? What can it be? And oftentimes you don't have a lot of time to even think about it. You just kind of go in and you just do it.
And I'm so glad you mentioned Firefox, because I'm not just saying this. That was literally the first thing I thought of when I first saw this image. Because I forget how old I was when I saw that movie, but that was one of the things, that and the submarine coming up from the ice. But when he flew low over the water, it was the first time I'd ever seen that happen. I didn't know that was something that happened physically. And that image was one of the ones that was burned in my brain. So when I saw this, I was just like, it hit me on all the feels, right? Because I'm becoming nostalgic. And this, of course, is a lot like, this reminds me of the camera angles we saw in A New Hope, during the trench run and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, often we do these pieces of art, and they never kind of, they inspire, but they never translate one-to-one to the final shot. But that was one image that I did where they actually they set up the shot to mimic, the stacking of X-wings, the way they're stacked in the shot.
Yeah, totally. All right, so I want to take a little bit of time also to talk about because you've had sort of one foot in the pre-production camp. You've done a lot of design work, concept design for a bunch of different things, and also at ILM, you're also working in visual effects. You're art directing visual effects essentially. What is it like to be in both of those camps, and how did you find yourself going from design into what your present position in ILM is now?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I didn't know what that transition would be when this was the first movie really. I'd been involved previous in some of the kind of post-production on a very small scale, like some of the Star Trek films. But I was kind of just a small little node design kind of element to it. This was a bigger thing where I would just stay on throughout the production, and then in post go from working with the production designer to working with the VFX supervisor, Roger Guyette. So I thought it was going to be, I mean, I was terrified the first couple of weeks when we got into kind of post, but in a way it's all one production, so it all was kind of a little bit seamless. I had the opportunity to go over to Pinewood and work on set at Pinewood. So I was kind of it started to become a bit of a shorthand, at least from the stuff I've been working on. And I was able to help support post-production and stuff that we had done in pre-production, of saying, well, we kind of took this idea, but it evolved to that idea, and we took it a different way, and here's where we are now. So I was able to be a bit of a liaison between those. But you're working with hundreds of people. You're a small part of that kind of machine. But I was able to be kind of one of those few people that kind of started from the beginning and kind of finished in the end.
Yeah.
But it's all very similar. It's still filmmaking. There's still similar conversations about design and shot design. It just got more into now looking at real plates and seeing the real shots for the first time. Being in a dark room in a viewing station at ILM, seeing the first new Star Wars shots was mind blowing. I remember just looking around at people. Everybody seemed really calm and kind of professional, and I was kind of freaking out a little bit. Like I just wanted to throw my arms up in the air and yell, but yeah, it was exciting.
And speaking of visual effects, one of the things that just blows my mind, not only was Star Wars such an inspiration, I think, to so many creatives who are in the industry today. And there's a lot of different people you can talk to who have a very similar story as you, looking at those sketches and being inspired by those. The other thing that's amazing is, 1977, A New Hope essentially pioneered industrial light and magic out of necessity to create the effects for that film. So many of the techniques, the analog techniques, were invented by the need to produce that film. Because George had this vision, and he was like, if we don't have a way to do it yet, then we'll come up with one. Yep. And then the amazing thing is you fast forward to today and doing all the work. We still do amazing practical stuff, but also the work that we do digitally in visual effects is kind of in a lot of ways taken its cues from the way that we did it analog. The techniques have evolved from that. Matte painting isn't actually involving a real painting, in shot with the camera, but the concept of how to do these effects, I think relates very well to what was pioneered back in those days. So I think Star Wars, what I'm trying to say is that Star Wars has this lineage of having a massive influence on visual effects in general as it relates to the industry. What is it like? Because I got to believe that you have a different perspective than I do, being at ILM and seeing, what is being done today and what was done back then. How are you? What is that perspective like in terms of kind of seeing it all together? We talked earlier about The Mandalorian, where things are coming full circle. That digitally now it's winding up in camera on an LED screen.
Right.
What would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think there's a real evolution of technology and an evolution of process, but there's an artistry that is always going to be, the hope is that the artistry is always there. And I feel like ILM and other companies too, but ILM is focused on the artistry, and then the technology has to be built into that to make that happen. For example, Mandalorian, I didn't work on Mandalorian, but what they have done with stagecraft and the ability to really create these immersive worlds live on a stage rather than it's just being green screen is, it is no different than some of the processes done on A New Hope that Dennis Muren was, really inventing on the spot in those early movies. So, the artistry kind of pushes the technology, not really vice versa. And as long as you're pushing yourself and challenging yourself creatively from an artistic standpoint, then you're going to find these great challenges, technologically speaking, and you'll make it happen. I mean, it really didn't. That kind of system that the Mandalorian has developed didn't really exist before.
Yeah,
there was front projection and rear projection, and they were starting to do some kind of quasi things, but it wasn't really from a production standpoint happening until then. And that's really just what the film industry when it's best is like when Jurassic Park was pushed to make a digital dinosaur rather than a go motion or stop motion dinosaur, or Star Wars shooting a ship where it has has motion blur. It's not
Right.
a static clean frame.
Mhm.
All those things push the artistry further and further. So yeah, and
Yeah, and
we still see it today, and it's part of the heritage of, I think, going back to those early days. So
absolutely.
I'm going to turn my computer
I'm
on.
so glad you mentioned about the artistry driving the problem solving or driving the technology. As someone, as I mentioned earlier, who's talking with artists about visual effects and about the kinds of things that we're teaching our students here at Gnomon. One of the misconceptions that'll come up quite often is, well, if I work digitally or if I go to 3D or if I do visual effects, I'll just be a technician. I won't be able to do creative things anymore.
Right.
And that's one of the arguments that, well, it's not an argument, but it's one of the points that I'm constantly helping to make, and you're doing beautifully now, which is it's all just tools. It's all creative problem solving. It's all artistry. And the tools evolve because the things that we're inventing evolve,
Right.
that we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, it's just the technology doesn't live in a vacuum. It's not generating itself. It's like the artists behind it that are demanding, the new look, or how do we get this process to look more realistic. That is the driving force behind all of it.
Well, and it's amazing. It's an amazing time, I think, for production too, because now we have choices. We're seeing productions now where they're like, well, let's film an actual physical model of the ship, just like we did back in the 70s, and then now let's mix that with some compositing, or now we can choose from what tools we want to use. And so I think that there's definitely been an evolution of the nuance and of the artistry, right? Using it as more of a scalpel than a hammer, to make something beautiful.
And I think a lot of it comes from, finding things, those kind of happy mistakes and those kind of happy accidents are still really important. It's harder to do on a computer. So if you can go out and shoot something in the world or shoot something practically and then always kind of bring it into the computer to enhance. Like, for example, there's a sequence in Rise of Skywalker where Kylo, in this kind of similar TIE fighter, is flying through this kind of red forest of goop. It kind of looks like the inside of a body. Well, we thought, instead of just doing a digital painting of that, which we can do, what if we just did a cloud tank, and we built a cloud tank in my garage, piled full of stuff. We kind of moved some stuff aside. And some of us from the art department built a cloud tank. We just tested different things. We actually, the environment was called meat space because JJ wanted like it to look like chunks of meat or something. So we literally we got pieces of a chicken.
Oh my goodness.
Graphic, and put it in this red dyed soup that we had made in this aquarium, and then just shot as many kind of lighting situations. We could kind of put the light behind it or above it, and took 100 different photos, thousands of photos, and then put them in one of our presentations to the director. And fortunately, JJ loved the kind of the old school process. Eventually that kind of fed into more of a CG world. It was just easier to control. But at least from a creative standpoint, we were able to find our footing through this weird, practical thing that we just did in my garage.
Oh, that is really cool. I'd never heard that story before. That's fantastic. And this was in your actual garage, your house?
This was in my actual garage. Yeah.
That's great.
I have a photo of us playing with this tank, and my kid at the time was like 5 or 6 or something. He just looked stunned standing in the background. Like, what are you doing? Is this people really pay you to do this stuff?
Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy is it sounds wild enough to be, I mean, that could easily be something that you'd hear that they tried in the 70s when they're making A New Hope, Yeah. Just kind of, let's fill up a tank and put some meat in there and see what happens. And I think that's beautiful.
So, and that's kind of some of our thought too is like, well, if we replicate a little bit of what they were doing back then maybe we'll capture a little bit of that aesthetic and retain some of that aesthetic when we build it in CG.
Yeah. One of the things that I've had the privilege lately to be doing a lot of streaming with artists out there about is, talking about the world of 3D art, digital 3D as a tool, also for 2D artists, and kind of building that bridge between 2D and 3D. And one of the things I love about some of the artwork that you've done is you bring both of those worlds together really, really beautifully in a lot of your paintings. And I think my first stab at trying to learn to do that was watching your Gnomon workshop that you did a while back in Moto. And it kind of helped me to start to get my head around that. Would you be willing to share a little bit about, I mean, I'm not talking about a tutorial or breaking things down at a granular level, but how did you begin to approach that? And what is your thought process when you're bringing both of those worlds together?
Yeah, I mean, 3D is just another tool in our toolbox, and I thought, we were kind of evolving in that direction, certainly with like the set design side of it in the art department, building our practical sets, but starting with 3D rather than old school way, which was just drafting and then printing blueprints of those draftings. So it started to become a part of the art department, and then some of the artists just got a hold of it and started doing kind of a hybrid or starting to play with it, and it just became another tool, and it became another exciting tool that we can use where, I still try to think in 2D, if that makes any sense, and then I build in 3D. So my 2D thinking is like, okay, for this ship, Kylo's ship could be more jagged, it could be more aggressive, it's not a ball, it's faceted, and I'm kind of sketching like that. But then I'll kind of draw maybe a couple different views of it in a sketchbook, but then to really kind of start to understand, well, what does it look like from the back, what does it look like from the side, what does it look like if the camera swoops underneath it, then I start to kind of build things in 3D, always bringing it back into 2D at the end to kind of paint over it, because I don't have the rendering skills that a lot of people have to really render these cinematically, but I do try to get it to a certain level kind of intentionally. I don't want to go so far in 3D that it just looks 3D, that I try to bring it back into 2D and do kind of some passes over it. But it's just another tool. I use it, also with Star Wars, I use it almost as a kit bashing tool too. So I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but like back in the Star Wars days, they would literally take, this is like the first trilogy, they would take, to build those physical models, they would take pieces from a World War II tank. And you could see on the Millennium Falcon, there are guys out there on the internet that have identified every single piece of kit bash piece, thousands of pieces. And I use that in the 3D environment. So I have a huge library of just random pieces, and I just start to, I have an idea in mind, and I'll just start to use those pieces. But you'll see a lot of, even some of my ship design, you'll see things where I'll just take something and just slap it on top of it.
I'll jump back to those bombers, because I mean, Kylo's ship, of course, is a beautiful interpretation of the TIE design. But you've worked on a lot of the really cool designs that we've seen in the films. One of them that I felt of all of the three most recent films, I think something that felt 100% Star Wars, but also felt 100% original, 100% new, were the bombers. And I can, I was poring over this painting earlier, looking at it and having a hard time. I could tell obviously there's some geometry in there, but it's really hard to see where the painting begins and the 3D ends, and vice versa. But would this be an example of a design that you kind of kit bashed with a bit and found some happy accidents?
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, I do try to get my artwork not looking just completely 3D, but I try
Hmm.
to bring some, impressionistic stuff to it. But yeah, the bomber was, I mean, it was just a fun project because you would have a phone conversation with the director and they'd be like, okay, we need a Star Wars bomber. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And they would talk about movies like this. I think it's Gregory Peck, 12 O'Clock High, which is this kind of bomber movie, which is a
Hmm.
favorite of the director Ryan Johnson. So he was really inspired by moments in that movie, and obviously it has its ties back to World War II, and which is a thing that George Lucas was always responding to, was those like real dogfights. So you kind of just start with blank paper and you do a bomber and you kind of do large things, but um, through a few conversations, I just pitched him this idea of like, well, instead of the bombs all laying out horizontally like we typically imagine, what if, because it's Star Wars, we can do whatever the hell we want. What if it was all vertical,
Yeah.
almost like the clip in like a Nerf gun or something?
Oh yeah.
And I kind of imagined it like a Nerf gun. And I remember him saying, sounds interesting. Tell me, show me what that means. Literally, like, go back and now, like, try to do a visual of that or do a
Hmm.
design of that. So I went back and kind of started to figure it out, just rough sketches. And then I quickly went into 3D to try to understand, because there's a very complex sequence where one of the bombers, she drops um, her little it's the thing that sets off the bombs. Yeah, you could see kind of this diagram.
Hmm.
Uh, so a lot of things had to happen where she had to get this kind of transmitter thing, um, and so he cared just as much about how it would play out cinematically from shot to shot as much as the design itself, which is,
Hmm.
that's kind of where you want to be. So I had to do a lot of thinking about, okay, well, they start up here, but it drops down here. And this is all part of conversations with the production designer, with the director. But um, but he's a gunner, and at some point, there was some different kind of scenes happening. So we had two gunners. So you had to kind of start to play with this whole puzzle and figure this out. But 3D allowed me to really kind of understand this from a human standpoint. Um, and then you, on top of all of that, you've got to figure out like, well, what makes it look Star Wars?
Right.
Kind of, because it could look like anything. It could look more Star Trek. It could look more Battlestar Galactica or something. So what are those key things that makes it look Star Wars?
Hmm. Well, and at least to my eye, you seemed to do what I know they did on the original films, which was I see a lot of World War II influence in here. It
Mm-hmm.
just feels like a reinterpreted, you know, a bomber that's not laid out like a traditional World War II bomber.
Yeah, we did a lot of research on B-52s, the Lancaster bombers, just a lot of digging around of like what made a bomber, how it was laid out, where the pilots sat, where gunners sat. Um, so a lot of kind of conversations of like, let's make sure this looks and feels like a bomber, but it's a
Hmm.
Star Wars thing.
I think that's, as I mentioned earlier, what I love so much about it in the sense that as soon as I saw it on screen, I knew what I was looking at. The visual language, it felt like something that would have been just off camera in the original three films. Like it was deployed at the Battle of Endor, but we just didn't see it,
Right.
or an earlier version of it, because and you brought in the ball turrets like we had on the old World War II bombers, which is one of the
Yeah.
coolest things
Yeah.
about them. But and then I would imagine because you're working in 3D, were you able to kind of get in there and experiment even with the possibilities of what kind of storytelling can be happening inside this thing with the long ladder and what we saw play out in the
Yeah.
film?
Yeah, very much. Because if we were going to go with this approach, then we had to make sure we were servicing the story and the beats of these action moments, and Ryan wanted to make sure that we had all those moments in there. So I would kind of put a camera in a lot of these different locations to make sure that he felt comfortable and he felt like, okay, we can make this work before we move forward with this design. Because, they spend a lot of time and effort making these kind of things happen. So you have to kind of check all those boxes before it moves on.
Well, and I was going to mention, obviously there was probably something in the script, some sort of story beat that indicated, that these two people were going to be on a ship to that extent. But I got to believe your design directly influenced the storyboard and the way that story was told in the film. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
very, very cool.
It's generally a rarity because you are working with big groups of people on this, trying to problem solve these. But this was just a case where I just opened my mouth and said, well, what if we go vertical with it rather than horizontal?
Yeah,
and then we had to prove that would in fact work.
Yeah. Well, and I think, reading your bio earlier, having a love for composition and the lens and for, I would imagine, photography or camera work to some degree. I think that's the thing that's so fun about designing in 3D is from a story standpoint, you get to get inside your artwork and just see 20 different possibilities in terms of, what that final illustration could look like.
Right. You could put a lens that's, you can choose between a long or a short lens, or you can make some of those decisions fairly early. You're not going to dictate, obviously, what the director of photography is going to choose, but you have a little more control of those compositions by choosing different types of lenses or aspect ratios. And you get to, because you're with a virtual camera, you get to really compose a lot of that, in there.
I remember right after the film came out, I got into a friendly debate with one of my buddies who was like, well, how did that bomber drop its bombs? There's no gravity in space. And and my first argument was like, dude, it's Star Wars. I mean,
has he not seen A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back?
Right, yeah, right.
There's no sound in space.
Exactly.
Ships don't fly like that in space because there is no gravity. I mean, people don't walk around a Millennium Falcon and sit playing chess if that was real. So yeah, I think eventually we do have a story group that helps support some of these ideas, and these things ultimately became magnetic, and they each had their own magnetic thing. But ultimately, Star Wars is not science. I think the misconception is Star Wars is science fiction or science-based. This isn't me saying this. This is George Lucas saying it. It's a fantasy, first and foremost. It just happens to have a very worn, torn, realistic look to it. But the physics don't really play a part in any of it. Although we do spend a lot of time, especially in post-production and ILM, determining real size and real physics behind things when needed.
Yeah, everybody in the chat's enjoying looking at this design too. You've also got Alex Alvarez, Gnomon founder. He just said, dude, so cool. And loved the Firefox reference earlier in the conversation.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
I keep moving forward here. So I think we've got about another 10 minutes or so left in our conversation. And one of the things that I always like to talk to all of our guests about is, Gnomon events not only are catering to our current students at Gnomon, but our events, because they're live streamed and available. When we do events on campus, we keep them open to the public. We want to build a community for aspiring artists and artists out there who may be in a position where they're just finding out that this is a real career, this is a real job. What kind of thoughts would you have to share with aspiring artists out there? Maybe they're late in high school or they're early into their college years. They're doing a lot of art, but they're dreaming of working in the industry, in film. And then let's narrow it down, of course, and let's kind of jump into both the camps that you're in, which would be pre-production, conceptual design, or working in visual effects.
Right.
Any thoughts of advice or guidance that you'd like to offer to that grouping?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta want it first and foremost. You can't be kind of, wishy-washy about it. You gotta want to work in whatever, if it's the film industry or television, because you love the craft and you love the process. That's first and foremost. And then you got to put the work into it. You got to put the 10,000 hours. And then on top of it, like from a portfolio standpoint, I always try to say to aspiring artists, like, be good at one thing, but also be, and it sounds contradictory, but also be a jack of all trades. Like, if you're really good at creatures, also show that you can do environments or interiors or set design kind of stuff. If you're really strong at set design and environments, show that you can do creatures or prop design as well. Because the more you're kind of a jack of all trades, the more you can offer a production, the more valuable you're going to be to that production. But if you're just laser focused on one thing, then you're going to have less opportunities. You'll still have opportunities. You'll just have less of them. And there's obviously exceptions to the rule. Whereas if, like, I want to work for Pixar, you better have kind of both a bit of a Pixar look, but then also Pixar is looking for people that have their own voice and have their own style as well. So you kind of have to have a little bit of everything. But I would say just don't concentrate on one thing. Like, really try to be as great of a jack of all trades as you can. Because that's how I see myself. Like, I don't feel like I'm good at one thing, but I feel like I'm pretty good at a lot of things. And if somebody throws kind of a curveball at me, I'm hoping I can kind of deliver on that. But I'm not like Sid Mead, who was like really good at one thing. If that makes any sense.
And I wonder if you would know better than I do, of course, but I wonder if some of that is part of the evolution, right? Maybe you have someone who was very early on in the game, like a Sid Mead or a Ralph McQuarrie. And I know that, Sid was amazing, but because we can do more at any given time on a production, because we have more tools available to us, do you think that need for a jack of all trades has increased? Because now an artist isn't just painting gouache. They could be working in 3D. They could be working in 2D. There's so many different tools out there.
Yeah, I mean, the artists that I work with, when I'm overseeing a team, I'm looking for somebody that I can say, hey, do some costume design right now, just for the next day. They're not the best costume designer out there, and I know that, but I want to see what they can do with it, because you never know what they bring. And, you can always be surprised by, asking an artist to do something a bit out of their comfort zone. It really, for me as an artist, I always want to be challenged. I always want to be a little scared going into something. Because if I don't have a little bit of that fear, then I'm not going to push myself, but if I'm comfortable doing one thing, I may not perform like I would under, some circumstances. When you're working on films, it could be pretty strenuous. It could be stressful. So you want to kind of have a little bit of that fear that pushes you forward and makes you kind of stay out of your comfort zone in a way.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. At listening to you say it, I can even see for myself where there have been times that an external force has asked me to do something outside of my wheelhouse, or I just decided to try designing something that isn't my normal bread and butter, and it can be very surprising what comes out of you in those times, because you don't lean on the things that you typically lean on.
Right.
I think that's fantastic, and I think it's very, very helpful. I think particularly for a lot of the younger artists I talk to, because that's a big question that comes up all the time. Like, what should I be putting in my portfolio? What should it be? Hyper focused? Should it be more generalized? What should it be? And I think there's lots of different answers out there, because there's lots of different production houses, and there's lots of different studios and different problems being solved.
Yeah, and even more than ever
Yes.
these days. So you have to be a bit fluid, and you have to be able to, because a lot of times you'll be showing a portfolio to somebody that doesn't know art that well, but if they see something that they like, or is specific to the production that they're hiring for, you're going to have a better chance of getting on that production. So
Yes.
having kind of a big, wider net in your portfolio, I think for me personally has worked.
And we did, while we were talking about that, we did have one technical question that came up in the chat, just in context. And they were just wondering, for the 3D elements and some of the kit bashing and things that you were talking about, what software do you typically work in when you're doing that?
I work in Modo, Foundry Modo. I don't know why, it was kind of a jack of all trades application that seemed to have a pretty robust 3D modeling and rendering. I mean, there's stuff like Blender out there that is really interesting because it evolves so quickly. But I'm kind of an old dog, so I've kind of stuck with Modo for a while, and I can work really fast in it. I'd love to kind of, try new things, but we're so busy. Often
Sure.
we just don't have that luxury. But yeah, it's pretty much just Photoshop and Modo for me. Yeah.
Well, and I think for anybody out there who's interested in seeing some of your processes I mentioned earlier, you can go ahead and you can look at James's title that he did for the Gnomon workshop, where he works in Modo and kind of unpacks a process for working in 3D and then rendering and then painting in 2D. I know that was very helpful for me to watch. Well, I know that I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've been at this for about an hour. What is there anything that you haven't? I close with this slide. Is there anything that you haven't done yet that you'd like to do? Like, do you have sort of a creative bucket list of something that you'd like to do one day?
Design a Broadway show? I don't
Wow.
know. No, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, what's wonderful about the film industry is, even though I do work mostly in science fiction, because that just, the need for design is so much greater because we're designing from nothing. But I do like working in other genres too. I worked on Steven Spielberg's Lincoln film, which was really nice because I did not pay attention to my history class in high school, and it was like a great history lesson. I just like learning about new things. So working on a film genre that maybe I haven't worked on yet, like a Western or something, could be interesting. But to be honest, like every production I work on, even if it's science fiction, there's like a whole new look to it and feel to it because it's a different director and different people that you're working with that bring different aesthetics to it. So
yeah.
No.
Well, and what you're saying reminds me a lot of a conversation that we had with Ian McKeg a year ago. If I can paraphrase, it's not so much about what you're doing, but the way that you do it. And I'm hearing you say that, when you're working in a creative industry, you've got no shortage of creative things coming your way. And the way you go about solving those problems is entirely up to you and your imagination.
Very much so. And a big part of it is the people that you work with. I've been very fortunate to work with really great, wonderful, creative people that are open to ideas, but also are, have kind of a very strong direction, but are also very collaborative. So, it's not like being an oil painter where you're kind of working alone in your own space, which I wish I could go back to that someday. That would be awesome.
Okay.
But the great thing about the film industry is working with other creative people and and learning from them, because you I've been doing it for a long time, but I learn something new every single time. Almost every single day, I'm learning something new. So, and it's because you're surrounded by really great creative people that have different points of view, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's pretty much more important than what the actual film is to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather work on a film that maybe isn't going to be like, the next Star Wars franchise, but the creative people are in it and they want to do it. Not to say that the people in Star Wars don't, because they're super enthusiastic about trying to get everything right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, like, it's all about just working with creative people, and
Yes.
meeting and working with those new creatives is such a gift to have.
I think that's a fantastic thought to end on, because in the mid 1970s there was no Star Wars franchise when they were making Star Wars. It was just another film,
Yeah,
and it was a film that nobody knew how it was going to do, and you'd better
right.
believe that it's because of the people that collaborated on that thing
Very
that
much
made it
so.
what it is.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, James, thank you so much for giving some time on a Tuesday night. I know that you have an incredibly busy schedule. And I'm thankful that you're doing everything that you do because it's very inspiring. So very pleased that you're able to join us. And guys, as we bid good evening to James, I want to invite you to stick around for just a very very short talk on Gnomon and how we are educating artists for the kinds of careers that James is doing, as well as the many others that he's working with. But yeah, James, thank you so much, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. I appreciate it.
All right, great.
All
Well,
right.
have a good evening.
You too.
All
All
right.
right. Thank
Bye
you,
now.
everyone. Bye.
All right, so guys, I'm just going to hop forward in my slides just a little bit. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to share with you about Gnomon. For those of you who may not be aware, maybe you're only aware of the Gnomon Workshop, which has been around for quite some time. Just as long, Gnomon has actually been a brick and mortar school, an actual school located in Hollywood, California. We are a fully accredited college offering degrees in training, a degree in training for the kinds of stuff that we're talking with James about. So just a really quick history of Gnomon. We started back in 1997. Our founder, Alex Alvarez, who's been in the chat with us this evening, started Gnomon as a place where industry artists could come and learn working in software like Maya and creating CG, animation, and so forth for film. It was relatively new at a high production value, and there was a huge demand for artists that could do that, and there were very few artists that actually knew how. So when Alex started up the school, it just snowballed almost overnight, and there was suddenly a tremendous amount of people wanting to learn, and we rapidly grew into being a full-blown degree offering college. We've won some great awards over the years. Some of the ones that you see here just have to do with us winning #1 school with the rookies. Those are the ones with little R's above them there. And that's all the top schools in the world compete. And we're very fortunate to have been able to win several times. We've also ranked #1 in the US for VFX animation, as well as internationally for VFX animation games as well. So just to give you an idea that we've been around for quite a while and we're very good at what we do. These are some of the projects that our graduates have worked on, some of the recent projects that have been out. Our graduates go on to work on some really amazing stuff. And we are also very proud of the fact that we have a very high placement rate in the industry. So we've in 2019, we were at 97% of our graduates from our full-time program placing in the industry. Even during a pandemic year in 2020, 94% of our graduates. And then go 2 years back to 2018, 100% of our graduates. And the way that we define placement at Gnomon is that a student who places in the industry means that within 6 months of finishing our full-time program, they are working in studio doing what they trained to do at Gnomon. So they are using the skills that they learned at Gnomon at a studio position. And those are some of the studios that you saw on the screen there that are regularly hiring students at Gnomon. So what do we teach? In a catch-all term, Gnomon teaches digital production. Now, this is more of an industry-related term, but it has to do with these types of skill sets and disciplines. These are things like computer-based visual effects, character and creature design, digital sculpting, character and creature animation, environment design, lighting and rendering, compositing, game asset creation, game engines, production workflows, and world building. Now, some of those terms you might be familiar with, some of them you may not, but every one of these skill sets translate into the following careers. So these kinds of production positions that you see on the screen here, these are the types of positions that you're seeing names represented for, say, when you're watching a blockbuster film, let's say one of the Marvel films. It gets to the section of the credits where it begins to talk about character artists and modelers and technical artists and pre-visualization artists, and that's when the screen fills up, end to end with hundreds and hundreds of names. These are those positions, and these are all jobs that are in high demand. And as James was saying earlier in our chat, the content that is being created has never been as high as it is today, and it continues to rapidly grow. So that means all of these productions are looking to fill these positions to make the amazing films and television shows and games that they're making. So I'd like to highlight, just picking out 4 examples from the digital production pipeline to show you what these jobs look like and how different they are from each other. So the first up is character artist, and this artist does exactly what the name implies. They are responsible for making the final 3D character or creature that you are going to see on screen, whether you're playing a game, watching a television show, or film. And this artist is using a piece of software called ZBrush. It's made by Pixel Logic. We're actually located on the same lot that Gnomon is located in. And this is an excellent tool for using traditional sculpting techniques, just like you would with physical clay, but using them with a 3D virtual ball of clay. And as you can see, it's perfect for creating anything organic in shape that requires that level of sculpt and nuance. Next up are VFX artists. And effects artists or effects animators, they are creating some of the amazing jaw-dropping sequences that we are seeing in films today. For example, what you're seeing here from the film Gravity. And because these kinds of sequences, they are 3D animation, but they are so complex, you wouldn't be able to animate every one of these millions upon millions of particles that you see. You can go in and you wouldn't be going in and moving them individually at a time. Instead, these artists are using a combination of their artistic eye, their ability to tell a story, and I would say their curiosity to look at the world around them and observe how things works. And they're using special software that essentially drives physics simulations. So these are running simulations of things like gravity and velocity and water and fire and so forth. And they're able to create amazing sequences like this. So if you are kind of both a left and a right brain thinker, you want to be really creative and come up with things that people have never seen before, but you're also willing to dig in and solve those problems and make something amazing like this, this could be a great career for you. Next up is the compositor. And a compositor is almost at the very end of the digital production pipeline. And that is because they essentially receive all of the different 3D models or animation, or even shot film in front of a green screen. They get all of those assets given to them, and they're responsible to bring all of it together into a seamless scene. So, for example, like you're seeing here, 3D models in the background, actors in front of green screens for the tennis players, more modeling for props and buildings in the foreground, additional actors are inserted, some texturing and lighting is done, and you wind up with a scene like this. This is very, very often used for establishing shots, kind of sets up the location for a story. And that's because the director, instead of having to scout out a real world location, travel there with an entire film crew and actors and get permits to film there, instead, the director can save a lot of time and money, and they can go to a VFX studio and say, hey, I need this location for my story. And it may even be a location that doesn't even exist on the real world. And everybody on the team goes to work to create all the things that need to be there, but the compositor is the person that weaves it all together into a beautiful and seamless scene. And the last example we're going to look at is previs artists. Now, previs artists are essentially making a moving storyboard of the film. Whereas traditionally storyboards are hand-drawn sequential images where, you know, the director is using an artist to block out camera movements and you know, how the story is going to unfold and the action taking place in the scene. Nowadays, artists are working in 3D. They're using a more simplified form of animation and 3D modeling because they are accomplishing a lot. They're telling the big picture, the story, what's happening, as you can see here. So this is a great position for someone that's interested in working in 3D in animation, but they are a big picture thinker and they're interested in working closely with the director and the cinematographer to get the story out, to make a sketch of the story before it continues further in production, to be able to give everyone a common vision to work from. All right, so with some of those positions and what they look like in mind, let's talk about Gnomon's academic offerings. How are we going about training artists to do this stuff? Well, here's a bird's eye view of Gnomon's academic offerings. First, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, Gnomon offers a fully accredited Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in digital production. And I'll share a little bit more with you about that in just a second. We also have something called a certificate program in digital production. This is a 2-year program. It's actually more advanced than the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree program. And it is essentially often used by artists who may already have a degree from another art school, but want to come to Gnomon to really focus in on what it is that we train so they can launch out into the industry. We also have a foundation in art and design. This is a course that lasts up to a year and is designed to help you build your portfolio at Gnomon. So the type of portfolio that you would use to apply to the BFA, you can go through the foundation and actually build it with us at our school. And lastly, we have well over 70 of our classes in our programs are also offered individually. All right, so first up, let's talk about the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at Gnomon. As I said, this is fully accredited, which means that financial aid and all the things that come with accreditation are available to you. It is full-time and on our campus, and we're very much looking forward as this year unfolds, being able to return to campus. In the meantime, we've actually been offering all of our classes and programs online. We had a custom-built online learning platform that we had made well before we had to go into quarantine. And so when we needed to make the transition, we were able to move over to that platform, and we've been having great success with students that have actually started into our programs while in quarantine and have, you know, as long as we've been doing and performing really well in our programs going forward. But we do look forward to when we could transition back to our campus. Now, the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree is going to cover all of the aspects of what we call a 3D generalist skill set. And what that means is essentially you're learning the entire digital production pipeline. So you will learn all of the positions and in the sequence that they need to go for production that I showed on the screen earlier. And while you are doing that, in addition, you have 2 optional concentrations that you can choose from. The first would be game art. And if you choose the game art concentration, essentially takes that same pipeline that you're learning, but tunes it specifically towards working within game engines, which is the way that production in a game studio needs to work. The other concentration, which is VFX, this is a recently developed concentration for the Bachelor of Fine Arts program, and it opens up some of the additional visual effects classes that were previously only available in the 2-year program now can be taken as a part of our BFA program. Now, as you're going through that whole pipeline and learning it, when you get to your last 4 terms in the program at Gnomon, you also get to pick out 4 electives. We do it in that order for a reason, and that is so you've had exposure to all of the different aspects of, you know, producing, you know, digital production for a film or for a game, and then you get to make an educated decision about what you're most passionate about. And you get to pick up those 4 electives to build extra skills in areas such as, say, animation, or if you want to be a modeler in a texture or something to that degree. So you have the option to get that broad foundational training of the entire production pipeline, which is the reason why our graduates are so desirable for hires at studios. And then you get to build on top of that foundation some areas of specific interest around where you're intending to go and work in the pipeline after graduation. You can apply to the BFA 4 times out of the year. So it's not just about the fall, but you can apply in the fall, the winter, the spring, or the summer. And we consequently also have students that are graduating 4 times out of the year. And the majority of our program students choose to stay on for the summer term. So they don't take a summer break, which allows them to finish in just 3 years so that they can get out there and get working that much faster. All right. So next up, we have our 2-year certificate program. And as I mentioned, this is more advanced than the Bachelor of Fine Arts program. It's a little bit more akin to, while Gnomon doesn't necessarily have a master's degree program, as Alex mentioned in the chat earlier, this is more at the level of education. It's more akin to master's level type of study. And as I said, this is intended for someone who may already have a degree, but is looking to come to Gnomon for a more intense and faster training in digital production to get out there and launch specifically into that industry. You are going to be full-time on campus. It is fully accredited. So you do have some aid options as well. And you get to choose from one of 5 areas of study. And those could be things relating anywhere from animation to modeling and texturing to visual effects, games, and so forth. And you build that foundational 3D skill set, and then you pick one of those 5 areas, and you get to launch out there and get started on your career. Next up, I'd like to talk about the Foundation in Art and Design at Gnomon. This is the course that I mentioned that is intended for building a portfolio. And that is because we recognize that Gnomon is a school you need to work really hard to get into. We're not necessarily an easy art school to get into. It does require a portfolio and an application to the program. And instead of, having to send artists to go work on their portfolio and come back to us, what we've been able to do is start up the Foundation, which is a 1-year course where artists who may not have a portfolio put together yet, or maybe they haven't had the opportunity yet to take some of those foundational art classes that you would need to know coming into Gnomon, you could take them right here at Gnomon. So you don't have to stay in the course for the entire year. It works in quarters. It's there for you to get in and get what you need. And we are teaching classes like anatomy for artists, figure drawing, visual composition, color and light theory, perspective drawing. And then we're also getting to some really great entertainment design classes, things like character and creature design, vehicle, mech, and environment design, and so forth. And this is a kind of course you can be going through and working with one of our advisors at the same time to get coaching on the portfolio that you're putting together. So if you're planning on applying to Gnomon and you need to build a portfolio to do that, this is a great way to prepare a portfolio for Gnomon, learning from the instructors at our school. Lastly, as I mentioned, we have well over 70 classes that are available individually. Currently, all of those classes are online while we are socially distancing, and then we will be making the transition back to campus. But this is not something that requires an application or portfolio submission. It's just simply something you can go on our website, gnomon.edu, and you can choose from the individual classes available on a given term, and just simply sign up for it online and start attending. All right, so with the programs in mind, I want to finish up by talking about something really important at Gnomon, and that is our admissions process. The admissions advisors at Gnomon are different than kind of your traditional college experience. The typical experience with a lot of art schools is you get all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, pull your portfolio together, send that in to an admissions advisor, and then kind of stand back and cross your fingers and hope that they get back to you with good news. At Gnomon, our advisors are actually the first people you want to talk to before you apply. And one of our advisors has actually been in the chat working with you guys during the stream, so you can feel free to drop any questions there as well. But this is our advisor team, and they function a lot more like coaches and mentors. They are there to help you with the application process. So even if you're just interested in Gnomon, you can reach out to one of our advisors, and they'll set up an appointment with you via Zoom, and they'll talk to you about your goals and what you're looking to do, and talk to you about how studying at Gnomon may align with those goals. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, then they actually would begin to offer portfolio coaching for you. You can start sharing your artwork. It doesn't have to be a finished portfolio at that point. You can show them what you're working on, and they'll begin talking to you about what Gnomon would be looking for in a portfolio application, and pointing you even towards resources that you can use to level up and work on those things. And then that's an ongoing relationship. If you work on those areas, you can come back to your same advisor and say, hey, I followed some of your suggestions. How's the portfolio looking now? And they will continue to walk in parallel with you. So this is pre-application coaching and mentoring, because we want to make sure that when you do apply to Gnomon, you have the best possible opportunity at getting in, that you have all of your questions answered, you know what you need to know, and you've been able to intentionally work on your portfolio according to what it is that Gnomon is asking for. So I can't stress that enough. This is a service that's available with no strings attached. And if you're interested in this, I definitely encourage you to follow the link that my colleague will share in the chat and reach out to one of our advisors today. So with that, I'll just close by mentioning our location, as well as some of the really cool events that we're doing, including tonight's event. As I mentioned, Gnomon is located in Hollywood. We have a physical campus on a studio lot in Hollywood. That location is incredibly important to us, and that is because all of our instructors, every instructor at Gnomon is required to be a working industry professional in order to teach at our school. So our location puts us close to their day job so that they're able to come straight from the studio they're working in and teach our students the very same workflows and skills that they are using currently on a day-to-day basis. This gives our students a 100% current education in digital production. And it also allows our students to have exposure to and access to working industry professionals in studios. So at Gnomon, we like to say that being in a class at Gnomon is like a mini internship. You actually are working under the instruction and guidance of someone who's working in a studio today. And our campus is really cool. There is a fantastic reel of the campus that I encourage you to go to the Gnomon website and view. We actually showed it at the beginning of our live stream tonight. So you didn't get to see that, go ahead and head back to the beginning and watch it. But Gnomon's an amazing place. Alex actually helps develop all of our spaces and labs, not just in terms of the technology that's in there, but also the visual presentation, because we want Gnomon to be an inspiring place. We want it to be more like you're working in a studio than just at a sort of academic institution. So definitely worth going and checking that out, guys. Lastly, we are doing a lot of events and live streams, tonight included. These live streams are over a wide range of subjects, whether they are more educational, instructional, or they are interviews with the artists behind some of our favorite films and games. Here's some examples on the screen here. And I would encourage you to go to our Twitch channel and our YouTube channel to see well over 100 past events. And really, you know, the interesting thing about that is you can actually use it as an educational library. You can browse by subject. You can look up a subject matter that you're particularly interested in, whether that's entertainment design, visual effects, and you can find relevant artists and talks and just jump in and hear from some of these fantastic industry professionals. So with that, guys, I want to say thank you for joining this evening. And if you stuck around for the short talk about Gnomon at the end, thank you again for that. My name is Adam Hartel. My colleague in the chat today is going to provide you a way to get in touch with the school if you so choose to do. But in the meantime, I just want to say welcome back to our live stream tomorrow, not morning, but tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., where our Chief Creative Officer, Josh Herman, joined by Gnomon's founder, Alex Alvarez, are going to be having an art jam from 2 to 5. These have been awesome times where, you know, it's essentially you get to hang out with a couple of industry artists while they're doing what they're doing and you're doing what you're doing, and you can ask questions in the chat. It's a great time. So come back and join us there. And stay safe, everyone. Stay creative. And I look forward to having you back on the stream again in the future. Good night.